North Cascades the rock quality is not great. I had a few other close encounters with large rocks that could have been bad and we near misses.
The more training you have, the lower the likelihood is that you will have an accident.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, it is a grim milestone, day 28, 4 weeks since Jay Slater went missing. And I do think when you have a length of time like this going on, you've got to start to second guess everything. You've got to start saying, okay, we need to rethink everything and think more effectively and think in a more concise, even targeted manner. And so with that in mind, we return to statistics, a scientific measure of probability as a measure of what likely happened to Jay for the number 11 clue we all missed. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Once again, I'll be going on a little trip into the fabric of a case I've written a couple of books about quite soon. This is in South Africa. If you want to join me on that journey, please join members only. In terms of this analysis, if you're enjoying this analysis, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Now, according to NBC, the North Cascades National Park in Washington has the highest death rate among all national parks in the US. So what are the idiosyncrasies of this particular park? What can go wrong? Now, according to the National Park Service, North Cascades has significantly more deaths than any other park. It had 3.7 deaths for every 100,000 visitors. This is over a long statistical period, 2007 to 2021. And that is more than 3 times the rate of the next deadliest site, the Wrangell St. Elias National Park Reserve in Alaska. So what are we dealing with when we deal with North Cascades? Well, according to NBC, it's a complex that includes 2 national recreation areas popular with boaters, but the park's namesake site is a well-known mountaineering destination with routes included in the beloved guide, The 50 Classic Climbs of North America. And so what are we dealing with when it comes to North Cascades? Mountains, high mountains, steep mountains. And so it's not rocket science to see why this park is so deadly. Slips, trips, falls, drownings, and car accidents were the most common way visitors to the park got hurt. Another thing, the unstable landscape and also volatile weather could make it dangerous. But the park also highlights the combination of remoteness and easy access by the public as aggravating factors. So the fact that you can enter the park easily, there's not really a lot of access control, but it's also quite far from infrastructure. And so according to NBC, the reasons why the North Cascade Park has the highest death rate aren't complicated. It goes on to say, the lack of infrastructure and wilderness surroundings create many risks even for the most experienced adventurers. Now, part of the issue with remoteness and lack of infrastructure are cell towers and cell signals. And although it may seem silly, one reason that Jay didn't have a charger, his own charger, was because he was out in the sticks. Although he had access to someone's charger, the situation was far from ideal. And because it was far from ideal, even if he did charge his phone, he didn't charge it nearly enough. Now, according to the executive director of the American Alpine Institute, that's a guy, that's Jason Martin, he said that a lot of people enter the park and just go hiking or backpacking or climbing, even things like canyoneering and things like that, trail running. Immediately, people are further away from the trailhead or away from services than they are in a lot of other parks. So that is the most idiosyncratic thing about this park, is how far away it is from services. And so in Jay's case, had he done so, had he just charged his phone and, had he made sure where he was instead of Snapchatting, this alone could have saved his life. It actually would have saved his life. If he had phone charge, he wouldn't need to have moved anywhere. He could have just waited to be picked up. And so if he could communicate, he didn't need to go anywhere. And that often happens with climbers that are stranded in nature. If you can communicate where you are, then help can come to you. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to get out of the area that you're in. And so because he couldn't communicate, Jay likely reasoned he was going to need to save himself, as it were. And that is how he got into trouble. So I've heard Jay's father saying it doesn't make any sense that he would leave the path or leave the road. It does if you don't have any way of communicating. It does if you have no confirmation or no certainty or no confidence that someone is going to come out to find you or help you. Are they even going to know where you are? And now I want to provide you with a very interesting account of someone who was an experienced climber who got into trouble and how they dealt with the situation. Again, this is from NBC. According to an account ABEG published on a website, what followed was a desperate effort to get help, one that involved on-the-fly first aid administered on the side of a mountain and a risky rescue in which Trent was scooped up by a ranger dangling from a helicopter in blowing winds. So this is obviously a real scenario where someone got into distress on a mountain. And Trent had torn his Achilles tendon, he'd broken his left femur, and he had suffered a nasty gash to his head. Seeing the approaching pilot, he said, was like seeing Superman. Trent made a full recovery and he went on to climb the same route again without incident a few years later. And here's the critical part. Had a member of their climbing party not brought a cell phone, and had they not found a signal deep in the wilderness, a stroke of luck that allowed them to call for help, things could have turned out differently, ABEG said. We would have had to hike out and maybe we would have gotten him to safety, but he might not have made it. And so the critical thing here was that the climber was with someone else, and that someone else was able to help him, and they had someone had a cell phone. And I think another thing they probably had was equipment and gear to deal with the situation they were in. That includes food, clothing, and all that kind of thing. And of course, Jay didn't have any of that. Now, Kelly Bush, a former ranger who worked for North Cascades for more than 3 decades, says, she's seen lots of people plunging from mountains or fatally wounded by falling rock and ice. It's the nature of steep and high mountains is that people who go over them and walk over them fall. And so the combination in any setting, if it's the moon, Mount Everest, any isolated setting of rugged asymmetrical terrain and being isolated means if you get into physical trouble, means there's no one around to help you if you do. In the Rust incident where a cinematographer was fatally shot, the relative isolation of that film set, about 20 miles from the nearest town of Santa Fe, cost first responders critical time in trying to save the victim. Of course, the more rugged the terrain and the more isolated the area, the more the danger is compounded. When you enter this terrain unprepared, let's say hungry or thirsty or tired, and your phone isn't charged, this compounds everything even further. And then if you add the climate elements, well, it compounds all of that even further. Now, Steph ABEG, a data analyst for Long Path, probably works with statistics as well, also said, I've climbed all over the western United States, but yet my 2 major injuries and accidents have occurred in the North Cascades. So the terrain is rugged, and that probably plays into it quite a bit. Now, besides all of these things, what the area around Musca, and indeed most of Tenerife, have in common with the Cascades is poor rock quality. In Tenerife, there's a steep kind of brittle, porous rock. And so what happens when the rock quality isn't great? Well, then it is more slippery. It just is easier for people walking over it, climbing over it, to slip. So I hope I've made my point. I'm not going to take it further than that, but now for the last. Put up your hand if you know about Jay Slater's phone being found on Playa de Juan Lopez Beach. Know about that? Keep up your hand if you think this was credible information. Keep your hand up if you think this is evidence and a matter of fact. Keep up your hand if you were part of the rumor mill that circulated this unconfirmed and dubious information. Now, you might call it clickbait when a YouTuber lures you into clicking on something of dubious merit. But what can we call it when a large group of people circulate highly doubtful information, including on my own channel? Tell me about highly doubtful information because it seems new and sensational. I've got a term for it, chumming. Chumming is what fishermen do, that they throw meat or chum into water to lure large marine animals to a designated fishing ground so that the target animals are more easily caught by hook or spearing. And this is exactly what I mean about not knowing how to think about or how to deal with reality. After covering this case for 4 weeks, the discovery of Jay's phone would be a major discovery. It would be explicitly in the headlines. Is it? There would be photos of the evidence. Are there? It wouldn't come down to an arbitrary photo caption buried on a Mail Online article, which of course I've seen. Meanwhile, the original image, including the caption, has since been removed by the Mail Online. What does that tell you? So what do you think? Does authenticity matter in true crime? Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll see you guys next time.